Good evening, everybody. Wow, I had a Robin Williams flashback there. If we could turn the music off, please. Thank you. My name is Scott Sampson. I am the fortunate fellow who serves as executive director here at the California Academy of Sciences. Thanks for joining us this evening. I think you'll find it to be an engaging and thought-provoking time, and it's presented to you by Foodwise and Reimagining San Francisco. And I'll talk a little bit about, well, I'll just talk about Reimagining San Francisco now. It is an alliance of 40 plus organizations, that San Francisco community-based organizations, government agencies, nonprofits, educational organizations that have all come together to form this citywide collaboration with, well, we believe unlimited potential to accomplish what no one or a couple of organizations can do on their own. The Academy is honored to be the backbone organization for Reimagining San Francisco, and we are very happy to be hosting you all this evening. We believe that we've got a lot to learn from each other, and that this community is literally critical to reimagining San Francisco in its most literal sense. And we think that this effort is deeply aligned with where the Academy is going, and our mission is to regenerate the natural world through science, learning, and collaboration. And for us, the natural world includes humans as part of nature, which is part of the reframing that we think is so critical to this moment. We are united in appreciation and love for this amazing city. In addition to San Francisco's stunning natural beauty, there's the racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity here that is equally remarkable, along with many other amazing cultural elements from food to art. Food is arguably one of the most universal ways of sharing culture and finding common threads across different and diverse communities. And that's why I'm really excited to turn the mic over to this panel of experts who will share their experiences and thoughts on food as an avenue through which we can improve the city's human health and ecological health. And I think a pretty strong argument can be made that you actually can't have one without the other. And they depend on each other in fundamental ways that thus far, really very few cities have grasped onto. So warm thanks once again to Foodwise, to the Florence Fang Community Farm, and the Cultural Conservancy for sharing their work with us. I sincerely hope that you enjoy the evening's programming, and if Alvaro Casanova can put down the handfuls of water, I am going to pass the baton to him. Please join me in welcoming Alvaro.
So thank you, Scott. Welcome, everybody. And I'm going to cue for the next slide. Cool. Awesome. So I'm going to do an land acknowledgement. And so I'll be reading a land acknowledgement that community science team has put together. It's on our website. Just want to honor the land that we're on. So give me one moment here. I'll read off my little note here. And yeah, and then if there's any other words that Sarah would like to share, I'll pass the mic over to her. So the California Academy of Sciences sits on stolen, unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone. The community science work we do throughout California also takes place on stolen native lands, primarily ancestral Ohlone, Amamutsin, Miwok, and Southern Pomo territories, also known as Granton Rancheria. As we connect, study, and learn on these lands, we continue to benefit from the historic exclusion and erasure of Indigenous peoples. Our work seeks to connect communities to nature, and this cannot be done without acknowledging the history of oppression these lands hold and seeking to help repair the immeasurable harm committed against the original inhabitants and stewards of California. Recognizing that we cannot undo the past nor the harm done, this acknowledgement is the beginning of an ongoing commitment to reflect on our own complicity and to dismantle the lasting legacies of settler colonialism. We invite you to join us today in acknowledging the original caretakers of this land and their elders, both past and present, as we seek to understand and build our own personal connections to nature that they steward. And so we can give a big aho, that'd be great. On count of three. 1, 2, 3. Great. Yeah, Sarah, would you like to add anything?
Thank you. Um, Good evening, everybody. Hello. My name is Sarah, and I think there's an official bio that will be read about me in a few minutes, which is always fun and exciting to listen to somebody describe you in this way. You know, it's always a little mini identity crisis. But I also want to acknowledge that oftentimes when we come to these types of moments, if there's Indigenous representation, we're asked to talk about the land acknowledgement. And that can be a complex conversation, everything from offering the land acknowledgement to opening the conversation as to why we do it. And I thought it was just poignant, and thank you very much for offering to include this voice this evening, especially too, just because of the topic of why we're here, which is really to talk a lot about land and our deep relationship to it. As Scott said, we are part of the ecology. We're not separate from it. And so what does it mean to open that exploration? So for just a few minutes to say the realm of land acknowledgement and the reason why we do it in many ways is about our own individual path, right? So as I stand here, I carry Yaqui and Apache ancestry on my father's side, and I carry predominantly Irish ancestry on my mother's side. And that's meaningful to me. It's meaningful to me as an Indigenous woman from the North American continent because as a Yaqui woman, I come from the Sonoran Desert region. And the Sonoran Desert region is currently intersected by a human being who at one point in time picked up a pencil and a piece of paper and drew a line and called that a map and called part of that the United States, the other part of that Mexico. And so, as an Indigenous experience today, we're considered a borderland tribe that gets to play with both governments rather regularly, which is just fun and exciting all by itself. But what that means too is that I have a land relationship. And my land relationship doesn't just tie me to this continent. As an ancestral woman who stands as an Indigenous person here, I also have a deep and profound song inside of me that sings from another continent on the other side of a beautiful ocean on this planet. And that deep and profound relationship is full of indigeneity and full of first relationship knowledge, as all human beings across this planet stemmed from. And so, really, what is a land acknowledgement? A land acknowledgement for me is a remembering of that first relationship. As I stand here as an Indigenous woman and often have to hold the space for indigeneity in the room, one of the things that's most important to me is first and foremost to honor the lands beneath my feet. I am a guest here. And being a guest here means that I have a call to be a good human being. Because if I can be a good human being, then when you come to my homelands, hopefully you'll be a good guest too. So, in my way, I offer a land acknowledgement that is steeped in our cultural traditions. Often, when we say hello, we bring the land with us. So, Lias and Chanmiro, ne po Sarah neta hiak vatwe ne wat, neta bakatete kahui ne wat, neta tamalpaish kawi ne wat. I call to my first waters, the Hiakvatwe, the river, the Yaqui River from which we are named for. I call to our first mountains, the Bakatete mountain range from which we stem from. And I call to my current home from which I'm honored to sit and live in the shadow of Mount, you guys call her Tamalpais, but in her original language, Tamalpaish, as I try my best to honor that. And hopefully, as we acknowledge that, to start our good circle of good conversation today about land and food and all the good things that happens when we reconnect to those spaces, we'll bring each one of ourselves in a good way and our deep remembering of our connections. Thank you.
Oh. All right. Well, now I'm going to introduce our moderator, Jamie Chan. She serves as the Director of Programs and Partnerships at the Garden Golden Gate Park. Her research includes examining K-12 equity-focused science teaching to enable climate action. As a master gardener, she co-founded a food security project in San Francisco called Sisterhood Gardens. Jamie is fourth generation San Franciscan and an urban homesteader who is passionate about gardens and places for education and social change. She serves on the board of directors at Foodwise. And so I'll hand over the mic and we'll start our programming. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Scott and Alvaro and everyone for being here. I'm going to be real quick, but just say that I worked at Cal Academy. I now have the privilege of serving on the Reimagining steering committee because I'm at the Gardens of Golden Gate Park. Stephanie Linder, our CEO, is here today too. And, you know, I'm on the board of Foodwise. And the reason why I do all these things is because I do believe in reimagining San Francisco. I do believe in the collective power of this room. I know many of the people here and all your wonderful impact and efforts. And so today, I hope that you continue to share your stories after the panel with each other and with us. And I do believe the intrinsic connection to creating these biodiverse green spaces that Reimagining is committed to, and its connection with the culturally sustaining communities that these organizations are so good at maintaining. So we're going to get started. But Ted, when we were having a debrief call of Florence Fang Community Farm, eloquently said that if we're going to reimagine San Francisco, let's reimagine urban farming and growing food and all those things that are built around it. So they're going to share their stories with you today. I'm going to do introductions because these people are amazing. Right here to my left is Tiffany Chung, Director of Education at Foodwise, and Tiffany oversees Foodwise's education programs. After graduating from UC Berkeley with a chemical engineering degree, she served in the Peace Corps in Mozambique as a science teacher and worked briefly in pharmaceutical research before realizing that food and climate education was where her passions were. She believes that food connects us all, and through food, we can become more environmentally, culturally, politically, and socially aware. Thank you, Tiffany. Sarah Moncada. Thank you, Sarah, for opening us up, is a native educator, dancer, filmmaker, author, and cultural arts advocate. Sarah became the Cultural Conservancy's second CEO in 2021, after previously serving as the Chief Program Officer since 2016. As CPO, she was responsible for co-creating and implementing the TCC programs in accordance with the vision, mission, and goals of the organization. TCC launched a native land project in 2019, Heron Shadow, building 7.8-acre biocultural revitalization project in Sonoma County, focused in traditional ecological restoration and heritage food and seed cultivation, grounded in Indigenous cultural land practices. Sarah is currently leading TCC's new partnership with Friendship House San Francisco, the Association of the Métis Ohlone, and the SF Recreation and Parks on native land access projects in San Francisco. Thank you, Sarah. And Ted, last but not least, is founder of Florence Fang Community Farm, the largest community farm in San Francisco and the city's only USDA registered farm. Mr. Fang is also an appointee of the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture to the Federal Advisory Committee of Urban Agriculture and Innovation Production. In addition, Mr. Fang is an elected representative to the USDA Urban County for Bay Area Agriculture and serves as president of the San Francisco Farm Bureau. So we have amazing people here. Thank you so much. The first thing we're going to do is have you talk to each other, which is what all good programs do. Can you please turn to your neighbors and can you describe an experience where you are in an urban green space and it made you feel a sense of belonging? And I certainly will admit, I work at a community group, a community site called Sisterhood Gardens. My colleague, Tim Wong, are you here, Tim? Who provided the beautiful dahlias. That's my example. When I'm at Sisterhood Garden, I have a sense of belonging. We are all taking them home. The dahlias are for everybody to take home. So please come stop by the dahlia bar later. But that's where I feel like I belong. And so please turn to your colleagues and think about where is that sense of belonging. Are we sharing this? Yeah. Oh, I already did it, so I'm good.
So maybe in like 2 minutes or so.
I'm gonna okay, you're I know, it's so impressive. There were so many titles there. I'm sorry. I hope I presented it well.
It was great.
A lot of words.
And true, it took me, I have no idea too.
You, yeah. I'm excited for you to be in this class. You know that, right? I'm glad you're here with us and still in this class. Oh, yeah. I want to be more helpful. Definitely. I haven't done it. Shall we start? Okay. I think we're going to ask people to finish their last sentence. This is a good sign. It's always a good sign when people are talking. I don't know. I'm a school teacher. I'm doing Quiet Coyote. Does no one know this? All right, Bunny knows. Thank you, sir. All right. We love our coyotes, but we're going to ask you to pull it back. Thank you, friends. Thank you. And I heard some great conversations. So that was the goal. So thanks so much. We're going to go through our panelists, though, and get their answers real quickly. So, Tiffany, where do you have a sense of belonging?
I think I'm brought back to my childhood parks and garden spaces growing up. I think that was probably the time I spent the most time outside. My parents were very like, just go outside. And so there was a park right across the street from my house. And I spent a ton of time there playing with my neighbors and my brother. And we were just always spending weekends at the local parks. And so I just feel like it's such an important and crucial part of my childhood growing up. And so that's kind of what I immediately think of.
Thank you, Tiffany. Sarah.
You know, there's a very special magic in trees, right? Oh, look at all the heads go. Yes. Yay. Yes. There's very special magic in trees. And I feel like, you know, anytime you're in that kind of deep urban grind, you can find a tree and it can ground you, kind of bring you back. And to me, that's the magic of just finding a good tree. And you can kind of find a good tree, hopefully more sooner to come. There'll be more of them, but there's good trees in San Francisco. We've got some good trees here. So I think there's some good tree people hanging around here.
So for me, I'm not really a born farmer. I'm more of a community organizer, and we started our farm as a community organizing project. And we were able to get a 1 acre site of land that's on top of a Caltrain tunnel. And when we got this land, it had laid barren for like almost 30 years. And so by the time we got it, it was basically a brownfield, blighted, a lot of garbage. And it took us 2 years to pick up all the garbage and to spread mulch across the whole acre. And it was just in those first couple of weeks, just picking up the garbage off the land made me feel part of the land and made me feel like this land belongs to the community. And so that's my own experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted. So the first question we're going to start off with is really thinking about how the work that you're collectively doing at your urban farm or urban spaces meet your community needs. So can we start with you, Ted? Can you tell us how the work at Florence Fang contributes to biodiversity and conservation?
Yeah. So, you know, I think one of the cool things about having a urban farm, community garden, or community farm that's different than these large farms that are acres and acres, hundreds of acres, is that we are able to create a little environment, create an ecosystem. And, you know, when we talk about like an ecosystem or ecology, what we're really talking about is just relationship between different living things. And, you know, these large farms, you know, they almost always grow just one thing, one crop, and you see miles and miles of one crop. But like at our community farm, we grow 67 different varieties of vegetables and produce to reflect the different ethnicities and cultures of our volunteer farmers and of the families that we serve. And, you know, in addition to these vegetables and produce, we also grow flowers to attract pollinators. We have native plants to attract native insects and small animals. We had a PhD student researcher from Stanford come, and she counted 34 different birds that were visiting our farm. You know, we have 7 beehives at our farm. And one of the fun things about beehives is that when the bees first come to our farm, they will investigate our farm. But after that, they'll fly 1 mile to 2 miles away to get all their different pollen. But our bees also attract other bees to come to our farm to help pollinate our farm. And one of the projects that we're working on right now actually is to grow purple needlegrass at our farm. You know, purple needlegrass is the state grass of California, if you ever thought of California having a state grass. And one of the interesting things about purple needlegrass is that there's a certain beetle that is attracted to purple needlegrass and that will live in purple needlegrass. And like all farms, we have pests at our farms. And one of the big pests that we worry about is this, it's called the cabbage caterpillar moth. It's a white butterfly that you see flying around almost all farms or community gardens. And when it's in the caterpillar stage, they'll eat the vegetables. And so you see the holes in your vegetables. And so that's one of the big problems that we have at our farm. And these beetles that grow in the purple needlegrass, at night, the beetles all come out and they will eat the caterpillars. And then in the daytime, they go back into the purple needlegrass to live. And so, you know, it's a natural way of taking care of pests. And they call that integrated pest management, not having to use chemicals to spray that could harm the environment. And so we're creating this environment, this ecosystem at our community farm.
Thank you, Ted. Does anybody want to add to that? Or
You know, I think there's a beautiful connection between kind of biodiversity and food cultivation and ecological restoration. It's kind of this beautiful dance that happens. And one of the things that we find a lot of synergy in, and one of the kind of tenets that we have in Indigenous land practices, you can't grow food in unhealthy land and unhealthy water. Right. So for us, when we're engaging in our land practice, or when we're engaging, for example, when we took over a new land project, the first goal was to restore land, restore healthy land, restore healthy soil. What does that mean? How do you get in there and tend the land and kind of reintegrate into those practices and figure out that you need a grass beetle? Because those dudes are super helpful, clearly. So how is it that you get to those storyscapes, and then how do those storyscapes become meaningful? And one of the things that I love about this kind of current wave that we're in our bridging of world sciences and our practices of integrating both Western sciences and kind of traditional ecological land tending systems, whatever they may be, that what we're doing is we're actually elevating our awareness of Indigenous sciences and traditional land practices and their capacity to be relevant in a current modern landscape. A lot of people look at traditional practices and they have this kind of sense of historical, you know, it's like on the dusty library shelf, those people of long eras be gone past. And what we like is that we can elevate that conversation. So no. Those were systems cultivated after thousands and thousands and thousands of years of scientific cultivation in the human practice. And they can still be meaningful in today's systems? How do we address climate mitigation or climate chaos? And can we utilize traditional practice systems to elevate and bring forward those kinds of practices? So to me, I like that conversation, and however we weave through it, the more the merrier.
And actually,
I just want to add, so actually farmers, we don't grow vegetables, we grow healthy soil
Yes.
to grow our vegetables.
Yay!
thank you. Sarah, I'm going to ask you to think about how this ecological work that you've been referencing already has cultural and social impacts on the communities you're working with the TCC. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. For those who aren't aware, Cultural Conservancy is an Indigenous Native-led organization. We've been in San Francisco since 1985, been Native-led since the early 90s. And, really kind of our mission is to kind of uplift and restore ancestral lands and ancestral people, and then connect them and let the magic happen. And that happens in a lot of ways, right? Once you can connect humans back to traditional land practice, all of the sudden things change. Whether that's language revitalization or food practice revitalization, what we call foodways, or that's arts, song, dance, carving practices, weaving practices. You can kind of run the gamut. As a human existence, we grew first and foremost in relationship to the natural world around us. So everything about, if you think about it, kind of reconnecting a human to landscape is all about healthy humans, right? And healthy landscapes. Even if you go all the way to the base of what we are as humans, our language, our first words weren't like, hey, Google, what's the weather? Our first words were, water, mountain. Our language is literally born of our relationship with land. So what does it mean, especially for Indigenous people in our current modern context? We are in service to Indigenous people. And let's face it, Indigenous people, a little bit of a hard time around the American continent for the last few hundred years. And in that part of that disruption and that deep, painful experience has been the separation of our access to land. And so as Indigenous people, without access to land and the capacity to re-engage in cultural land-based practices, that impacts everything from cultural identity to language, to cultural practice, to foods, to seeds, to remembering who you are. And so if we can work to reignite that remembering, if we can work to re-engage and work in those reconnections, then we can work to re-engage and rebuild humans. And in the capacity to do that, especially inside of a food justice or food landscape conversation, you can't go past the San Francisco urban landscape without recognizing in the demographics that Indigenous people are at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of all of the access to healthy, clean food. And with that, they come with the highest of the highest of the highest of the health disparities that include things like obesity, diabetes, what we are now calling diabesity. This problem of diabetes and obesity coming together in a very toxic experience for Indigenous people. And it is something that has to be addressed. And you can ultimately start to address it by simply reconnecting Indigenous people to their traditional foods. And that is like a thing that you're like, oh, simply. It's not so simple, but it's deeply powerful. And so our land work and our regional work of kind of scope of in service to community is about that restorative practice. You create healthy land, healthy soil, healthy water, you start to have healthy food cultivation. And all of a sudden you're in service to the 700 different Indigenous people that represent the North American Indigenous landscape inside of California, because San Francisco was one of our largest urban relocation centers during the relocation era. So now we've got all those voices, all that diversity to reconnect to. And so to have land and be able to say, oh, I'm doing a Seneca seed project with Oneogen, their original white corn, right? And then I'm also working with California Native people to do mugwort restoration. And then the team's got a whole wonderful kind of elderberry project happening over here. Oh my God, we had 300 elderberry plants last year. It was hilarious. We went a little overboard. But you kind of thank you, not quite overboard, but you get into these landscapes and then you get into these practices and you realize you're doing more than kind of ecological restoration, food justice. You're rebuilding community.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That is a really good point. And when we think about rebuilding those communities, we also think about the generations that are coming after us and the workforce development and leadership development that happens in your collective spaces. Tiffany, can you tell us about some of the workforce development work that's happening at Foodwise and how it connects to the land?
Yeah. So just as a little background, Foodwise, we're both best known for running the farmers market at the Ferry Building in Embarcadero. We also do run a smaller market in the Mission. But beyond that, we are an education nonprofit. So we do work with a lot of youth, elementary, and high school students. So in our high school student program, we actually work with 3 high schools in San Francisco. And it's after school program. And a lot of they're all ages of teens. And a lot of those students who join our program, we do often get a lot of students who are just coming to, whose families have just immigrated to America. So we have a lot of Latinx students who are part of our program. And then we also, in general, it's a lot of their first times in some sort of like more formal, we pay our students for participating in our program. So it is a sort of an internship, like job training program. And what we do is we actually work in the school gardens and we actually bring them to the farmers market as well. And so just kind of like back to the previous question, culturally like tying in or the importance of our program and like sort of that cultural tie-in. When students do visit the school garden for the first time and it seems like an unfamiliar space, we really try to grow crops that students might be interested in or are familiar with. So when we have them walk around the school garden and we're like, hey, taste this plant, and they realize, oh, wait, that's cilantro, like that's something I know. It actually creates this sense of familiarity for them and excitement about the garden. Maybe they haven't really like seen cilantro growing before, like cilantro flowers. They're so excited when they're like, wait a minute, this flower tastes like something I know. And so that's like one piece of our programming that's really important, is just getting them sort of invested in their own school community, even if they might be newcomers to the country itself. And the other piece is just kind of creating opportunities of like what are possible career paths or career trajectories I can go in that are related to our like local food system. We really want them to learn about our local food system. So we do things like, one, just practical skills, having them in the garden, growing plants. We also do a lot of cooking. A lot of students right now they just really want to know how to cook for themselves and have that agency in having food choices. So we like to harvest what we grow in the garden, and then we'll do, some of the schools have great kitchens, so they get to cook meals every session after school. And then we also bring them to different places in the city. So we brought them to Florence Fang Community Garden, and they're like, whoa, like this is what people actually do for a job. Like I can do this. And so seeing that pathway is really important for them. And same with like going to a kitchen. We really just want to create this safe space for them to kind of explore job opportunities and job structures. And a lot of our students actually work in our farmers market as well. So if you entertain the idea of a farmers market also being an urban green space, we have a lot of our students in our market on the weekdays, weekends, working alongside the farmers in our market. So they do learn about farming methods, maybe not so directly in the land, but with farmers. And they get familiar with all the different crops that farmers grow, learn about those crops, and then also sell them to customers and talk to customers about this as well. So currently we have, I think, about like 5 students who have finished their summer program and still are staying in the market. And so it's just been a really great pipeline to get students like invested in the local food community and also find meaningful career like pathways and job training skills through that.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. And I've seen these interns, and it's been a really impactful program. And to speak to the fact that you talked about funding, because when you pay someone to do this work, I think it's a really meaning and equitizing opportunity for our young people to really see that as a future career. Ted, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, we also have both youth programs from first grade up, and we have an apprenticeship program. And like with our youth program, it's, our farm is in the Bayview, and it's a food desert, and so there's just not fresh food around. And when you ask the youth when they come, where does your food come from? And I say Safeway, and so, and then we had one youth that came with their parents on a very warm day, and they ate one of our strawberries, and the strawberry tasted so sweet to them, like candy. And now they tell all their friends when they get strawberries, you have to run them under hot water. Strawberries need to be eaten warm, and especially in our neighborhood, the youth growing up, they go out and they play basketball, and then they get tired and sweaty, and they have no choice. So they go to the corner store, and all they have is chips and sodas. And so now they begin to see that there are alternatives. They see potatoes growing out of the ground, and all of a sudden they can match it up to French fries that they're eating. And so that's part of the youth program that we do. We also have an apprenticeship program for young adults, and we pay them. And particularly, we're focusing on African Americans to try to learn to grow their own food and to get professions in this area. So if you have any kids that are graduating, we'd love to take them on too. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm going to ask this next question because I think it's important. I also want to be mindful of time because we want to get questions from the audience. But can each of you kind of narrow down on what might be one of the biggest barriers for ensuring this sovereignty and this equitable access that you're talking about in your collective work? What are they? What are those barriers? What are the greatest ones?
I could talk for a while, but I think definitely in the school system and landscape for school gardens, people love to build a school garden. People want to fund the creation of school gardens, but then once the garden is created, and I see a lot of nods, it's very difficult to find the funding to maintain the school garden. So we've got lots of beautiful school gardens in San Francisco, and a lot of them kind of just end up to the wayside once that funding dries up. And that's just definitely one of the biggest challenges. Or that the school staff, like some willing school staff, and then like third parties like us, like as nonprofits, will kind of step in to try to sort of patchwork the problem. Literally, like I know I have spent summers where the hose needs so much patching up, and we've had to take the hose from one side of the basketball court and drag it all the way across the basketball court to provide water to the garden on the other side of that, because the school district cut off the water in the garden. So that's kind of like some of the big struggles in actually maintaining thriving garden spaces in schools, just finding staff, finding organizations and time and funding to actually like keep these garden spaces alive and thriving for the students. That's, I think, the biggest challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that that's an uncommon nonprofit challenge. I think if, and specifically too, if you're in a nonprofit challenge, it's a cause-based nonprofit, right? So the world that we're in is considered cause-based nonprofits. We're here in service to community, whether our communities are, awesome urban youth or Indigenous people or other cultural communities that are just looking for general food access. This is a similar story, and funding and support and lack of funding and lack of support is a very similar story. I think you probably find across all of us. Folks don't necessarily understand, like, funding and support is wonderful. We all need funding, but support that comes in like the form of hands too is really wonderful. Volunteer support, especially if you're land tending, becomes a really wonderful part of community access. So just to help spread the word about very important community access projects that are doing this kind of work and elevating them up and making sure that folks know that these causes are alive and well, and don't forget to support along the way.
Yeah, thanks.
I just want to add one thing that is a big barrier, of course, is land. It's very hard to find land in San Francisco, and a lot of times the pieces of land that are available are already taken. And so, even our farm, we're kind of lucky because we're on top of a tunnel, so they can't build housing on top of that. And so we have it available to us. And yeah.
That worked.
Yeah, that was a good strategy.
Yeah. This kind of segues into our last question right now for the panel before we go to Q&A about, reimagining the farm or the urban green space. What does that look like for you? What is this vision that the audience can join you in completing? And I think you've already spoken to some of it in this last question, but you want to add to that? What is that vision?
Well, we're specifically, I think you kind of alluded to it too when you read that really exciting bio. We're working to expand access. As Ted's saying, access to land inside of San Francisco is not simple. Access to land in Northern California is not simple. Access to land in all of California is not simple. This is just a common conversation. So how do you relieve it in your microclimates? One of the things Ted and I were just talking about is the power of small communities. Sometimes we don't have the capacity to do massive, grandiose movements. Well, that's something Indigenous people have been learning for a while now. So we've recognized that there's things we can do at smaller, powerful levels that can be a part of groundswells that actually can create movements, right? And we're in this very unique time in the world right now. This is a very socially just moment that we're feeling in our landscape as a humanity. There's kind of DEI initiatives and social justice initiatives and support to these different varying diverse communities that in a new way. But we know that these are pendulum swings. And especially as Native people, we know that this kind of support to Indigenous communities comes and goes. And our goal is to, when it's swinging your way, plant seeds. Plant as many seeds as you can plant. Water like crazy. And then it swings back the other way. And hopefully you have got a beautiful option of possibility and sustainability to keep these movements alive while the pendulum's swinging the other way. And let's face it, we might be having an interesting pendulum swing going in our current social moment. And what can we be doing right now? What can we be doing to support each one of these different organizations to plant those seeds of sustainability? Because the pendulum's going to swing the other way, but we're still here. And we're still fighting for green space, and we're still fighting for access for humans to have land and water and food and healthy living spaces. So how do we collectively create that good groundswell right now so that it's something that becomes sustainable? So to me, that's the call.
For our farm, I mentioned that we're in the Bayview neighborhood of San Francisco. It's the most underserved and the most diverse neighborhood of San Francisco, and the most changing demographically. So one of the things that we're doing with our farm is that we're both growing food and growing community. In our neighborhood, it's now 36% Asian, which is mostly immigrants with limited English proficiency. It's 26% African American, about 16% Latina, and less than 10% white. And so our farm is bringing that kind of community together. And so we are based on principles of diversity. We have all these people farming together at our site. And it's not just terms of diversity, also language and the intergenerational stuff, having the kids work with the elders. Each party is learning from the other at the same time. And I think that's one of the things that we can reimagine our urban farms, community gardens to do, is to bring the community together.
Thank you, Ted.
I think for me, for the youth that I work with, I think my vision or dream is that all those youth, even the ones we don't work, do have access and do know where their community is and do know where their urban green space community can be, whether or not that's growing and, at an urban farm and being able to grow their own food, or just being able to relax and connect with a nice tree. I really think that when we, like a lot of the youth we work with, when they first enter our program, they really don't spend too much time outside nowadays. There's always an AirPod in the ear, or there's always something that's kind of like there's certain barriers that are preventing them from really feeling that connection to the land. And if we can find a way, especially in San Francisco, where there is a lot of green space, even though we are a very urban city. If youth who are then going to become adults can really find that sense of community and relationship, I really feel like we would have done a great job.
Thanks, Tiffany. Those are all wonderful, inspiring visions for reimagining our urban farms and green spaces. I think we're open for questions. We're a little bit over, Alvaro. We're good? Yeah. Would anybody have any questions for our panel?
Any questions? Do we have any questions in the live stream? No? Okay. In the back. Give me 1 second.
Thank you all. Just to start with a softball, I was at a PTA meeting today where we had to work on budget to fund the garden program. And literally, and just to give a perspective, we have to find about $40,000, which we did. But it's a really hard decision when you're comparing it against other programs. So it's real. Thumbs up. Thank you.
Thank you for allocating that money.
Other questions? Comments? Oh, we got it. Rebecca, and then I got you, Los.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much. It was really great to hear from all of you. One of the things that we're trying to do with Reimagining San Francisco is think about how we could connect different projects across the city. So I wonder if you're thinking about reimagining, like what are some of your ideas for like thinking big, like your smaller places that you work, but then like what would be your dream of connecting things together across the city?
I would love to see kind of every time a tree comes down or something's changed or something, or they redo a gardening project, like anytime that happens, to see more ecological restoration happening kind of in relationship with community. When you bring those like look at the 30 something different birds that are happening over here, my daughter was just asking me like, Mom, do you want to live in the city? Like what part of the city you want to live in? I'm like, I'm really partial to like the deer and the birds. I grew up in the National Park Service. I'm a great outdoor nature person. And the more opportunities that we have to kind of bring that ecology back into the urban spaces, the more opportunities we have to just enliven that diversity, especially here. We've kind of overstimulated some of the gardening plants and some of the landscaping plants and kind of understimulated some of the ecological plants that we need to reignite the cultural biological diversity here. So I think that would be one of the things I'd say is just kind of a call to deepen the ecological restorative efforts. And then you can partner with very cool greenhouses and garden projects everywhere across the city and create a network that's working with those different greenhouses and those different projects to be the sources that the city is utilizing to help kind of stimulate the local economy and those local different groups to source those restorative efforts in the city. So I think that would be something that would, I see little pockets of it happen in places, but to kind of turn that into, as you're saying, something that's deeper connected, a stronger network that can have a deeper impact. I think that would be a place where I would lean in.
That's a great question, and I think this is a time when a lot of people are thinking about that. One of the things is that with all of our community gardens or farms, oftentimes we have committees and we're unto ourselves. And so I think there is more partnering going on, but like one of the committees that I'm working with is the USDA, and for the first time, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is working with urban agriculture and innovative production, mushrooms, aquaponics, and they're trying to get everybody to get registered with USDA, to have USDA opportunities. And then I'm also part of this Farm Bureau, San Francisco Farm Bureau. It's the first Farm Bureau to be created in 50 years. And it's another attempt to try to help all the farms, if not bring them all together.
It is such a good question. And so I'm just thinking about Sisterhood Gardens and what Tim and I and many other community members were funded by the Chinese Progressive Association, fiscally sponsored by them. One of the things that may not answer your question, Rebecca, but also feels like answers it, is that part of what we do is we are also tapping into the very distinct, almost microclimate level stories of that habitat. Like Tim will, he's restored a native part of the garden to native planting. He's talked about the riparian corridor and the distinct plants that live in along Brotherhood Way historically. And those are the things that actually remind us about the rich biodiverse space that it once was and how we can get to that. And also we'll connect it across to our neighbors in the Bayview and other places and look at those distinct stories and how they're similar. And I think, like Ted was saying, there is a lot of cross-pollination going on. We are visiting each other. We are starting to understand those distinct stories about the corners of San Francisco and the unique biodiversity that live in them, because they do vary. And so that's the way that I feel that we can unite all of our collective groups. I do feel like sometimes we live in little silos because we are working so hard to develop our little part of San Francisco into this green biodiverse space, but yet we do not have a lot of it still.
I mean, I can do the Foodwise farmers market plug. I mean, we work with so many farmers that might not live directly in the city, but do a lot to feed the folks in the city. So I think strengthening that sort of more rural, urban connection would be really important. And like for folks to understand, like a lot of the that sort of food access like perspective, those are the communities that do like feed the city. And I think especially it was very apparent like during the pandemic when a lot of the more like national global foodways were kind of stopped up. Like what we were able to do is really like show the importance of having more local like sustainable food networks be really robust and still be able to like feed the people in San Francisco.
I feel like I should add, there's 100 community gardens and urban farms in San Francisco. About half of them are run by the city, mostly Park and Rec, and the other half are all independently run.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great conversation. I'm Louis Bloomberg with the Sutro Stewards. So the city has several large blocks of open natural land that provides a lot of habitat for ecological restoration. And yet we're seeing some conflicts, especially with the coyote right here in the park. And I wondered, in your Reimagining San Francisco, what role does wildness and wild animals play and wild species play in the Reimagined San Francisco?
I just say that they're a part of it. Actually, our beekeeper had out a little cage to catch rats in. And one day when we were walking by, there was a baby skunk in there. And the mother skunk was trying to get the baby out of the cage. And we called the animal welfare. And so we didn't know what to do. But about 5 minutes later, the mother skunk and the baby skunk were running away. And so they had gotten out of the cage. And turns out our beekeeper shouldn't even have a cage like that to be more in tune with the wildlife. We also don't have coyotes, but of course raccoons are everywhere. And we have a fish in our pond and we have chickens, and somehow everybody's getting along.
Other questions in the audience? And, oh, yeah.
Hi, I was really interested when you were talking about how different schools have all these gardens, they get funded, and then they kind of just sit dormant sometimes. Has there been any work of trying to activate local communities with people that may not have outdoor space that want to give back and activate that? That's just where my brain is working right now.
That's a great question and a great idea. We, to my knowledge, haven't. It's a little tricky because it is still a school property after all. So sometimes it's difficult to have outside public kind of be able to enter and exit some of those spaces at will. There are some great There's a great garden, the Academy and McAteer, where it is somewhat public, and we've had different groups kind of come in at different times to try to steward that space. But it is a little bit just difficult without having like a main point person. I think that's where the bigger barrier comes, because you still need a main point person at every garden space. But yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the identified foci of the current Reimagining Alliance, and the Alliance is only as good as its members, so join, right? If you are an organization, you're sitting in this room and you're not part of the group, please be a part of it. Many of you are members, I know that. One of the things we like to focus on, but is not our primary focus or our priority, but one of them is important to most of us, is the Greener Schoolyards Initiative. And so we are looking at what a future of a schoolyard and school garden is. And the district itself is going through. Is anybody here from the district? I apologize. I don't want to speak to. Yeah, we're going through a lot of transformation in the facilities and thinking about what that access looks like, what a green schoolyard looks like as an actual learning space throughout the day, not just for gardening as an elective element, essentially. And so this conversation is happening right now. And so it's a really great opportunity to talk to the district, to come to Reimagining events and begin to elevate that conversation, because we're all thinking, I think, many similar things.
I do want to add too, there is a group out there that is partnering with the San Francisco Unified School District called Food Corps. And Food Corps has about, I don't know, 7 or 8 core members every year. The core members change every year, but they're each assigned to a different school to help the school's gardens grow.
Hello, thank you very much. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the community of everyone that's come out here today. I was curious, there was a lot of discussion of looking back upon Indigenous practices and methods to revitalize our space. And I was wondering if you know of current practices and if there's need for current innovation in the space and how you've seen that being implemented in the community spaces and gardens.
So we tend to different land projects currently, and then are also partnered in land projects across San Francisco. So as was mentioned earlier, we're currently, we're working with San Francisco Parks and Rec and Ramaytush Ohlone and other kind of cultural groups to try and find more access internally in the city. But most of what we do in cultivation is in the North Bay, in terms of our particular growing space. And then we bring that food into the urban context and do our food distribution, our food justice work here. So we're kind of that rural urban bridge you were kind of talking about. We're really exploring that a lot. And so in our growing practices, one of our growing spaces is up in Sonoma County, kind of just outside of Sebastopol proper. And we often will bring the urban community up there to have these kind of land revitalization days, kind of get you out of the urban context and then bring you home with some foods and some plants and kind of, have a good day connection. But in that landscape, one of the realities that we have is, prior to our couple of more recent wet winters, prior to that kind of first one that came, was that about 2022, somewhere in there, we were experiencing, and during our growing season and our regionality, a lot of people's wells were drying up. And we were facing the very real possibility that we weren't going to be able to water. And we were starting the growing season, and we were kind of figuring out what we were going to do. So we threw some ideas out there. Let's try it. Let's go for it. We're going to dry farm. And we were running a seed rematriation project at the time. We had to get permission from the folks that we were doing seed rematriation with, because when you're doing seed rematriation work, how you grow that seed impacts its genetics. And the impact on the genetics of that seed is an important conversation in seed rematriation, right? So we had to go through all the good protocols, but we basically we're going to try it because there's no water. That is a current modern problem. And everybody in the organic farming community is like, you can't dry farm squash. We're like, okay, but give it a shot. So we gave it a shot. And we married traditional ecological knowledge. So we looked at the water table, where are we? We brought that kind of permaculture design thinking, if you will, kind of into the conversation. And we worked with a local tribal elder and we're like, listen, we're going to go for it. And here's the landscape and here's what we got. And he kind of looked around for a while and like, do it over there. I'm like, yes, uncle. Right? And so then we went for it and we brought in traditional farming practice, dry farming, which comes from desert folks. As much as I respect the term food desert as a desert woman, you know, deserts are lush and vibrant. Let's work on our language, y'all. But we went for it. We brought in dry farming techniques from indigenous principles that work in dry regionalities. And we put it in Sonoma County, California, and we went for it. We had a bumper crop. Everybody thought like, no, you can't do it. And watch us go. So how do you do it? You explore. You try it on. I want to go for waffle farming the next time we've got a dry year. Do you want to do some waffle farming? I'm into waffle farming, y'all. It's not just because I'm a desert person. I just like the way waffles look. But there's ways that we can go for it. And you kind of look at the, you know, what's going on. And what's going on in Sonoma County is really different than what's going on in the San Francisco Peninsula. Soil's different, water's different, air's different, salinity's different, chemistry's different. There's all kinds of things to do. So we reach into the toolkit and we go like this. One of our problems in the current agro industry world that we've got is we've narrowed it down to say, this is the way you do it. You stop it, you're doing it wrong. Right? Yeah. And it's like, we gotta stop that narrative. This is an inappropriate narrative. We have all kinds of possibilities and all kinds of solutions that we as human beings have been cultivating forever to try and engage in our landscape and grow food to feed our hungry tummies. It's like one of the things we're really good at. We just forgot we're good at it. So we can reach into that landscape and kind of go for it in modern context anywhere we can think of. See what happens.
In the spirit of just going for it, I wanted to follow up on the conversation for Tiffany with your need for schools. It strikes me that there's just some bureaucratic barriers that are limiting some of the vision. And one idea, you mentioned all of the community gardens that are available. There's also like a 300+ person wait list for the city community garden program. So I think just finding the opportunities to engage and get some people on the wait list that want to get their hands dirty and find a school that doesn't have the access limitations and just pilot a partnership or something, just get everybody just doing something and get people's hands dirty and get the schools the support that they need. I know I'm an architect. I tried to get a community garden in a project recently that had 2 different owners. It was a daycare and senior housing. Perfect, right? Neither of them wanted to manage and have the liability and have the shared space. So I understand that that can be a restriction, but it can be as simple as like a fence and a gate that somebody could access after hours to help support. It's just, I think it just takes a little bit of pushing back against the bureaucracies that say, oh no, we can't because of the risk here or whatever. And to be able to bring those communities together and help build that support. So I just, like, try to find that pilot program to get something where you get the resources that you need in a different creative way, because I think there's so much potential there.
Yeah, let's talk after.
I think we're at time, but do you have a question? Do you want to make it quick? Up to you. And then I'll close out. Got a request for all of you.
Okay, yes, no question. Are there challenges in an urban landscape like San Francisco to the quality of the soil, being that it has a history of landfill and also possibly some maybe toxic levels of, stuff from industry? Because maybe you can find,
he said totally.
Maybe you can find land and people have land, but maybe they haven't looked subterranean as to all the things that might exist. So yes, no question.
Yes, that's a challenge. Yay. Yeah. No, that's a real challenge. Where the San Francisco, in the course of its own life cycle, has changed its physical appearance and its natural relationship One of the funniest questions I get at the Cultural Conservancy folks is, "Oh, you guys do traditional ecological restoration. We want to do ecological restoration." I go, "No, you don't." And they go, "Yeah, we do." And you're like, "Yeah, but it's a sand dune." And they're like, "Oh." Like, right. So be careful. What are you asking for? Be thoughtful about that and be thoughtful about how you engage in the landscape. And it is something you have to be careful of in San Francisco. We've got to face our history. We're not, as humans, we're not super awesome with the land. And when we tend to screw up and like dump chemicals in it or kind of like, oops, accidentally blow things up for military purposes, which has all happened in the San Francisco landscape, then we have to deal with consequences. And some of that means some extra mitigation. Yo, mushrooms, you guys, I hear this is like the way to go now. But you do have to deal with it. And it's part of the challenge, especially when you're trying to cultivate and grow food in San Francisco. It's one of the things you have to deal with. So if you're funding and you're getting involved in funding, please include some additional funding for soil mitigation. Thank you.
You need to test all your soil before you can grow anything. Yeah. And then if your soil is bad, you have mitigation to do.
Sounds like we could talk about mitigation at the next talk. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I have a request, which is if you could pick up, I'm sure you all saw this little pamphlet. You flip it around, there's a QR code. And your exit out of here is to hit that QR code and fill out the survey for Foodwise.
It will take 5 minutes.
It'll take 5 minutes. And then once you're done, there's still lots of good snacks, dahlias, coffee, water, and time to hang out. But we do have to be out here at 8, but that's plenty of time. And make connections, talk. Yes. And then, I'll give you guys 5 minutes to do this, and then we'll give them a round of applause. And definitely want to thank all of our staff over there, our digital engagement team,
Yay.
all the staff. Big shout out to Sydney back there, helping put this all together, and our speakers.